Today we start module 2 of our course, that is flow sheet synthesis or conceptual design of a chemical process. In previous lecture, I outlined the hierarchical design of a chemical process. A chemical process systematically is designed through 5 steps. The first step is that we decide whether we should design a batch plant or a continuous plant. The next stage is that we design the input output structure of the flow sheet. The third step is to design the recycle structure of flow sheet, where we do all the material and energy balance. The fourth stage is designing of the separation system of the process, and the fifth and final stage is the energy integration of the process. Now, in this module we shall see each of these steps in process design in greater detail. Now, the first step, that is deciding whether we have to go for a batch process or continuous process. As I mentioned in previous lecture, the design problems are different than other problems that we encounter, in that they are always underdefined, that very little of the input information is available. So, we gather the remaining information or missing information either through literature survey or through experience gathered from other projects. Many times some thumb rules or heuristics are also used for designing of a process. However, when we start designing a new reaction scheme for a particular product, we have to design not only the reaction scheme that is invented by our own R&D, but also the other processes that are already existing in the market with different process licensors. In that, we will ensure the profitability and sustainability of our process. The input information that is normally required at the initial stage of a design problem is as follows. The first information is that we should know the chemistry of the process, that is the reactions and reaction conditions. Then the next information that we need is the desired production rate. The third information is desired product purity. The fourth information is information about product versus purity. Then the next information that is required is the reaction kinetics or rate of reaction. The phases of reaction, whether it is a single phase reaction, 2 phase reaction, 3 phase reaction, and then in case of catalytic reactions, we also need to know the rate of catalyst deactivation. Catalyst is an expensive component of the process. So, the knowledge of catalyst deactivation is essential. The next is processing constraints. What are the factors that limit the reaction conditions, the temperature, pressure of the process or the reactor type, so on and so forth. The seventh information is the plant and site data. The next is the physical properties of all component. And then the information about safety, toxicity and environmental impact of the material involved in the process. And finally, the cost data of product and byproduct. Now, we shall discuss each of these 10 factors in somewhat greater detail. The first is the reaction information. Now, as I said, we need to know the chemistry of the reaction very well, the chemistry of the process. Then next is the operating conditions, temperature, pressure, so on and so forth. Then the information about side reactions. Okay. Now, side reactions may not be detected in a laboratory experiment. Laboratory experiment is carried out on much small scale. Therefore, it may not be possible for a chemist who is doing experiment to list all the side reactions. However, one must be careful to know these side reactions and the extent of these reactions, because any side product that is formed maybe on a trace level in a laboratory experiment can be detrimental on large scale, because it is produced on much larger scale and then it can trigger many other side reactions, or it can spoil the yield of the process, so on and so forth. So, that point we need to know that side products or byproducts of the process should be known precisely. Overlooking of side products can adversely affect the economy of the process. The next aspect of reaction information is the yield of reaction. Under what circumstances you will get the maximum yield? Conditions corresponding to maximum yield. Now, when a chemist conducts an experiment, he would try to get those conditions under which the yield is maximum. Okay. However, it is often observed that the conditions for maximum yield may not be the most economic conditions or optimum conditions for operation of the reactor. and that point we should note. Okay. It is not necessary that conditions for maximum yield are also the conditions for optimum or economic yield. And this is typically the case for processes in which the value addition is limited. Okay. That point we also note typically is the case for processes with limited value addition, which means the difference between the cost of raw material and the product that you produce is not much, maybe typically 50, 60, at the most 100%. Now, let me demonstrate this thing with an example. Okay. Now, let us say we are carrying out a reaction in which A goes to B and there is a side reaction where B goes to C. B is the desired product of the process, while C is the undesired or waste product of the process. Now, the typical progress of a reaction can be shown as follows. With respect to time in a batch process or with respect to space time velocity in a continuous process. Okay. So, what we are plotting now is concentration versus time. The concentration of A, which is the reactant, main reactant, falls continuously with time. The concentration of B, which is an intermediate product, shows a maxima somewhere in the time course, and the concentration of C, which is undesired product, rises continuously. Now, a chemist will always try to give conditions at point of maximum yield of the desired product. So, let us say point P, which corresponds to maximum yield of desired product. Now, if you project this point downward and see what are the concentrations of the other two products that correspond to maximum yield of the desired product, we see that almost 70 to 80% of A has been converted by the time maximum yield of the desired product is reached, and in addition the concentration of the undesired product is also significantly high. Therefore, by the time we reach condition of maximum yield of desired product, a significant quantity of the reactant has been converted into waste product. Now, this is affordable if the value addition from A to B is quite high. However, if the value addition from A to B is low, that means we are dealing with valuable raw material, we cannot afford to lose a significant amount of raw material in the form of waste product. Therefore, the point of optimum yield may not be the point of economic yield. And under these considerations or under these criteria, we would find that it may be economic to design a reactor for a smaller conversion of A, which corresponds to point Q. Now, we are encountering an economic trade-off. At point Q, the conversion of A is small. However, as you will see, the conversion of A into C is negligibly small. You can see that concentration of C corresponding to concentration of Q is very small. That means, at point Q, we have negligible loss of raw material to waste product. However, we have a very large amount of unconverted A at the reactor outlet, and then the cost of separation of A from B and C and then recycling it back to the reactor is an additional cost. So, that point we note, we are having a trade off for large amount of unconverted A, which is the reactant, which needs to be separated, and separated from B and C and recycled back to the reactor. This means that the recycle cost is high, corresponds to high recycle cost. Now, a better approach for optimization of a process under such condition is to work hand in hand with a chemist. Once we determine that point Q is the economic point or optimum point of reactor operation, we need to know more about the reactor outlet at point Q, as the kinetics of the reaction, the side products at point Q, and so on and so forth. Therefore, an engineer should give an input to the chemist, and then the study of the chemist on that particular point could be a good input for improving the process design. So, that is what the solution is for a better process design. Work hand in hand with chemist for improvement of process, and optimization. Now, the concept of selectivity. Whenever we have more than one product from a process, we always need to define the selectivity for the desired product. Now, in the example that we just saw, B was the desired product. Okay. So, we define selectivity as moles of B obtained per mole of or moles of A reacted. This is one of the common definitions of selectivity that is used. Some engineers use the definition of moles of B obtained, that is the desired product, divided by moles of C obtained. Both definitions are correct. There is no hard and fast rule that you use any of the definitions. However, when we use the literature data for designing of a process, we need to check which definition of the selectivity the authors have used. Okay. Now, let us demonstrate the concept of selectivity with the example of HDA process that we saw in previous lecture. Demonstration of concept of selectivity. HDA process, I would write again briefly. Toluene reacts with hydrogen to give benzene and methane, and 2 moles of benzene combine reversibly to give diphenyl and hydrogen. Benzene is the desired product and diphenyl is the side product or waste product. Now, if for a given reaction conversion, let us say the conversion is X, then per mole of toluene fed to the reactor, 1 minus X moles of toluene are unreacted and X moles of toluene react. Now, the unreacted toluene is separated and recycled. Out of the reacted toluene, some toluene forms benzene and some forms diphenyl. If we use the first definition of selectivity, that is moles of desired product divided by moles of the reactant reacted, then the moles of benzene that are formed are S into X, where S is the selectivity. Now, stoichiometry from toluene to benzene conversion is 1, but from benzene to diphenyl conversion is 2. Therefore, the moles of diphenyl that form are half into 1 minus X, 1 minus S into X. So, 1 minus S is the loss of selectivity. Now, using this definition, we can alter the flow sheet of the process that we had seen earlier. We see a reactor and then the toluene feed. Toluene is of 2 types, one is fresh toluene and second is the recycled toluene. The reactor effluent goes into a separation system where benzene and diphenyl are produced and the unreacted toluene is sent back to the process. The benzene produced is S into X, while diphenyl produced is 1 minus S by 2 into X. So, we can write the process flows in a simple flow sheet using selectivity as shown. Okay. The next parameter is that of the catalyst deactivation. Now, a chemist tries to design a catalyst that has not only high yield, but also high selectivity. However, an important factor in the operation of a plant for long term is the catalyst sustainability. Is catalyst able to give same performance for a prolonged period without getting deactivated? Okay. Therefore, catalyst deactivation rate needs to be known while designing a reactor. If the catalyst deactivation rate is not known, then that is an uncertainty in the process design. Of course, when we are designing a process for the first time, there could be many uncertainties in the design, and therefore, we need to check the profitability or sensitivity of the total product cost for these uncertainties. The sensitivity of total product cost to the uncertainties in design needs to be known. Now, as the design proceeds, the research and development section of the company may carry out simultaneous experiments, and maybe in later stages of design, greater knowledge of these uncertainties is available. In that case, one need to repeat the calculation for a better process design. Repeat calculations as soon as greater information is available regarding the uncertainties. The next important factor in the process design is the production rate. What should be the optimum production rate for a product? Now, this is a crucial factor in process design, which is influenced by many parameters. The first parameter is that whether the product is entirely new product or several similar products are already in the market. Whenever a company invents a process for production of a new product or a new process for production of an existing product, they patent it. That means no other company or competitor can use the same process or manufacture the same product. However, competitor companies always try to find alternate methods or ways of designing or producing the same product or a similar product which has same properties as the product introduced by this company, and therefore, the product has certain life. Okay. So, the life of the product is also an important factor in designing the production rate. As soon as competing products come into the market, the sale of a particular product goes down, and therefore, we have to see whether we are going to access about 50% of the market or only 5% of the market, access to market. Okay. Whether the company can access 50% market or higher in country or only 5%. Then another factor is the share in this market. Let us say for a particular product, the total demand is 100,000 tons per annum, but what share of this market my company is going to access. Therefore, it matters a lot whether what share of the market the company has access. The company has access to is owned by the company. Now, there is always an economy of production, okay, or economy of scale. As the production rate increases, the unit production price goes down. Okay. However, there is a limit as how much product one company can manufacture. Therefore, whenever we are introducing new product in a market, we have to consider the largest ever plant built for that particular product. Which will give the highest economy of scale. However, the product has to be new in this case. Then another factor that governs the size of the plant is the size of the equipment that is needed for the plant. If the equipment for the plant is manufactured at another site and then it is transported to the site of the factory, then there is a limit as how large a reactor could be, how large a compressor could be, if it is transported by road, if it is transported by rail, so on and so forth. So, size of the equipment limits the volume of operation. And finally, the market conditions. The demand for a product may fluctuate in time. Therefore, the company has to keep a record or a knowledge of the demand for the product while producing a particular product. The demand for a product can fluctuate, therefore, continuous market survey is needed to decide the optimum production rate. If the demand for a particular product falls, then the company may have to operate the plant below the capacity. The next factor is that of product purity. Now, product purity is also fixed by market forces. It could be possible to produce the same product with varying purity if the market allows for it. Production of a range of product with different purities. Now, typically, as the purity of the product increases, the operating cost increases. And so does the cost of production. Therefore, the unit cost of a product can rise as the purity rises. Okay. So, this factor is an important factor in deciding the design of a plant. Okay. Next is the raw material. Now, when a particular reaction is carried out in laboratory, chemist uses very pure reactants which may not be available commercially. Very pure reactants are used by chemist, and when we try to transform the same process on large scale, that purity of raw material may not be available. Now, in case impure raw material is available, okay, we have to assess the level of impurity. We have to assess the sensitivity of overall operation of the process, that is the reactor, the catalyst, towards this impurity. Is this impurity going to trigger side reactions? or is it a neutral impurity? So, depending on these factors, we have to decide whether we need to purify raw material or not. Okay. That is all. Then is the factor of processing constraints. Now, processing constraints are mainly due to safety or thermal sensitivity of the material and so on and so forth. Now, if the reaction mixture is explosive, then we need to keep the concentrations of reactant below the explosive limit. If the material that is under process, either the reactant or the product is thermally sensitive or is likely to polymerize, we need to restrict our processing conditions. Okay. For example, for a thermally sensitive material, we cannot go for very high temperature because the reactant it may decompose before it is converted into product. Similarly, for reactants that polymerize, we may have to add inhibitors to prevent polymerization. Okay. In some cases, the coke formation is a processing constraint. Okay. Then the toxicity of the material, corrosiveness, all these factors affect the design of the process, and they also put constraints on the processing. Then is the factor of plant and site data, where we are going to build a plant, what is the source of raw material at that particular location, what is the infrastructure that is available in terms of electricity, in terms of water, in terms of sanitation for disposal of liquid waste, solid waste, so on and so forth. So, all these factors come into picture. Okay. The location of the plant, access to the location, whether it is connected by road, rail, air, then the local infrastructure, these all factors come into picture. So, this is typically the general information that is needed at the beginning of process design. Now, when we want to decide whether we want to go for batch process or continuous process, we need to take into consideration some more factors. Now, continuous processes are typically 24/7, that they operate 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. The typical working hours of continuous process are taken as 8,000 hours per year, or in some cases it is something like 330 days per year. The rest of the time is for maintenance and shutdown and startup. Now, batch processes are where the equipment is started and shut down very frequently. The production is small. But rarely you will find a process which is completely continuous or completely batch. You will always find a process that has some units operating in batch mode and some units in continuous mode. Like for example, if there is a distillation column in a batch process, then the material to be distilled is stored in tank from different batches and the distillation column operates continuously. So, that is a sort of hybrid design. However, when we say a batch process, then majority of the equipment in that process operate in batch mode. Now, what are the guidelines for selection of a batch or continuous process? The first and foremost is of course the scale of production. Typically, if the plant capacity is greater than 10 million pounds per year, we use a continuous process, and for plant capacity less than 1 million pound a year, we use a batch process. But remember, these are thumb rules. These are not hard and fast laws. Now, uncertainty in design is also a factor. Like I just said, that the catalyst deactivation rate is a parameter which cannot be determined with accuracy. So, that is an uncertainty in design. So, if a process design for a new product has several uncertainties, then it is a good idea to carry out that process in batch mode, where you can start up and shut down equipment and do all the process changes more frequently. Okay. So, batch plants are more flexible and simpler. And due to this, for companies making multiple products or plants making multiple products, batch process is the most suitable. The next factor is the market for the product that the plant is making. For products with seasonal market, batch plant is more suitable. And an example of this category is fertilizer. If the fertilizer is produced throughout year, then we have to store for that fertilizer till the next season, which may increase the operating cost. Therefore, it is preferred to produce the seasonal product in a batch plant. Then the operational problems. Some reactions might be very slow, and therefore, if they are carried out in continuous reactors, the volume of the reactor becomes very large. Okay. Some reactors may use 3-phase reactions or 2-phase reactions, solid liquid or solid liquid gas type of reactions. Now, in this case, if the kinetics is small, then you have to pump the slurry with solid suspended in liquid at a very small rate, and that may cause settling of the solids. Okay. Now, in some cases where polymerization of the reaction, polymerization of the product occurs, or fouling takes place very frequently, then also you cannot carry out the reaction in continuous mode, because you will have to shut down and clean up very often, which is not very practical. Finally, the batch process offers flexibility of carrying out multiple reactions or multiple processes in a single vessel. Like, consider a case where the feed is heated and then admitted in the reactor after addition of catalyst, and then the product is separated with some process like distillation. Now, in a continuous process, you will need 3 different vessels for heating of the feed, reaction and separation. However, in a batch process, you can carry out the same operation in a single vessel, which could be the reboiler of a distillation column. You can take the reactant and then heat it, then add catalyst, let the reaction proceed, and the product is simultaneously distilled off. Now, here the heating, reaction and separation takes place in a single vessel. Now, cost of 3 separate vessels and cost of a single vessel is much different. There you achieve the economy of scale. However, if the production rate in a continuous process is P, then to achieve the same production rate, you will have to take a larger vessel, which is of capacity 3P. So, now we list the decisions that we need to, the decisions that lead to choice of process, whether continuous or batch. The first is selection of process units. Then optimum interconnection or sequence and interconnection. Then the process alternatives that we need to consider. Then we need to list the design the dominant design variables, then the optimum operating conditions, and on the basis of these criteria we have to assess the profitability of the process and list the best few process alternatives. However, in case of batch process, we need to consider some more factors. Like for example, which units should be batch and which units should be continuous. Then, which operations can be coupled, as we just saw, like heating, reaction and separation could be coupled. So, which operations to be carried out in a single vessel, and for which operations you need separate vessels. Or can we use individual vessels in parallel steps? Then, the extent of intermediate storage, and the location. So, today we have seen the first stage in process synthesis, that is decision whether we have to go for continuous process and batch process, and we have also discussed in detail the factors that lead to this decision. In the next lecture, we shall see the input output structure of the flow sheet in greater detail.